Good day, class. Welcome to Rest 11 Methods of Research. We are still here at Unit 2, and now we are here at Part 2, which is on writing Chapter 1 of your proposal. We're just done with your statement of the objectives or statement of the problem. Now we go on to your hypothesis. So we will review again the parts of Chapter 1 and go on to what is that part and how do we write that part. So we're done with your background of the study, then your statement of the objectives. Now we are here at your statement of the hypothesis. So statement of hypothesis is actually a prediction of what your study will find, a prediction about the relationship between two or more variables and translates the specific problem or objective into expected outcomes. So this is actually an intelligent guess or an educated guess on the relationship between your variables. So notice that in our example here, you have your hypothesis 1 and your hypothesis 2. So HO1 and HO2, you will see later that HO here means H naught is a null hypothesis. And here is another null hypothesis. So simply your hypothesis, it is called hypothesis if you have one, hypothesis if you have two, states the relationship between variables must be testable from a research problem or specific problems and must be simple and concise. So there are two forms of hypothesis. Again, you have your null hypothesis and your alternative hypothesis. So the null hypothesis or your H naught, this is also called your H. This one is H1. This is sometimes called your H. This one is sometimes called your HA. So this one is none here. So your H naught is the assumption that we are trying to reject. It usually states what there is no difference between your intervention and the thing that you have an intervention with. So we are trying actually to reject that null hypothesis that there is no significant difference, because what we want is there is a significant difference if we use a certain intervention. So we usually state the null hypothesis because there are several possible alternatives. It could be greater than your usual or traditional method, or lesser than your traditional method, or not equal than your traditional method. So the way we would formally set up the hypothesis test is to formulate these two hypothesis statements. One that describes your prediction, which is your alternative hypothesis. This is actually your prediction, what you want to happen. And the one that describes all the other possible outcomes with respect to the hypothesized relationship. So your prediction is that variable A and variable B will be related. So you don't care whether it is positive or negative relationship. Then the only other possible outcome would be that the variable A and variable B are not related. There's no significant difference. And usually we call the hypothesis that you support or your prediction your alternative hypothesis. And we call the hypothesis that describes the remaining possible outcomes the null hypothesis. And sometimes we use the notation H1 or HA to represent your alternative hypothesis or your prediction, and your H naught or your H0 to represent the null case. So you have to be careful here though. In some studies, your prediction might very well be that there will be no difference or change. In this case, you are essentially trying to find support for the null hypothesis and you are opposed to the alternative. So frequently asked question, is it a must to have a hypothesis? Note that Not all studies have a hypothesis. Sometimes a study is designed to be exploratory. So, example is your inductive research. There is no formal hypothesis. For example, your phenomenological researches, your narrative researches, and perhaps the purpose of the study is only to explore some area more thoroughly in order to develop some specific hypothesis or prediction that can be tested in future research. So a single study may have one or many hypotheses. And here, simply again, no, it is not a must to have a hypothesis in all your quantitative research and descriptive studies, such as your qualitative studies, don't need hypothesis. However, for random RCT, randomized clinical trials and experimental studies, this requires having hypothesis. And when you want to use inferential statistics, you will also need hypothesis. So next question is, how do we write your statement of the hypothesis or hypothesis? First is determine first if your study needs a hypothesis. So is your study a randomized clinical trial? Is it experimental? Do you have inferential questions? And then next is identify the specific problem or objective. So, for example, in this statement of the um, objectives, you will see here numbers 3 and 4. They want to determine if there is a significant, or there is a difference in the antibacterial effect between the various concentrations of pako and kabuyao. In number 4, wants to determine if there is a difference in the antibacterial effect between the various concentrations of bako and kabuyao ethanolic extracts when compared to that of the positive control. So take note of these numbers, number 3 and number 4. So after determining if your study needs a hypothesis like this one, I can see this is experimental. Determine what is your prediction or expected outcome. So we go back to that. What is your expected outcome for number 3? Will you be expecting that there is a significant difference between your various concentration? If yes, then that would be simply your alternative hypothesis. There is a difference in the antibacterial effect. For number 4, are you expecting that there's a difference in the antibacterial effect between various concentrations compared to that of positive control? If there is, if that's your prediction or expected outcome, then that would be your alternative hypothesis. So that numbers. So third is, what is the reverse of your prediction or expected outcome? Because we will be writing your null hypothesis. So we have 1, 2 null hypothesis. So the reverse of that is there is no significant difference in the antibacterial effect between the various concentrations of pako and kabuyao ethanolic extracts. And the second one is there is no significant difference in the antibacterial effect between the various concentrations of pako and kabuyao ethanolic extracts when compared to that of the positive control. So you can see that it is just like or your part of your statement of the objective. So it's easy actually to write your statement of hypothesis. So frequently asked question here, is this part of the proposal important to reject or accept the null hypothesis? This is important especially when you're already writing your results and discussion for your chapter 4. So what is the reverse of your prediction or expected outcome? This is for your activity 2.2 for statement of hypothesis. You determine first if you have questions or if you need a hypothesis. And then you will be writing your research question here first, and then the null hypothesis and your alternative hypothesis. So another frequently asked question, is this the same as the assumption of the study? Assumptions are statements of what the researcher believes to be facts but cannot verify. So, oftentimes, especially in descriptive and historical researches, assumptions are not explicitly expressed but left implicit. That is, they are unwritten. So, generally, every specific question is implicitly based on an assumption. So, if there is no assumption, there can be no specific question. So, assumptions are those things we take for granted in a study. They are statements by the researcher that certain elements of the research are understood to be true. So, again, just like the slide before this one, this is for activity 2.2. Uh, Formulate your research hypothesis or hypothesis if needed. So we talked about in this PowerPoint video, what is the statement of hypothesis and how do we write this part? So that's it for your statement of hypothesis. Thank you for watching.